Yes, Spurs fans, welcome back to the Irish Hotspur here. This is going to be your Thursday panel show with the Irish boys. And we're in good spirits. We're in good moods because Spurs are back again this time when it comes to the Champions League. If only we could play the Champions League every week. If only we could play Man City every week, then potentially we would be in a situation where we could be challenging for a Premier League and Champions League at the same time. Spurs find themselves close to being in 17th with only a Europa or European competition to really be looking forward to. It's crazy that Thomas Frank is doing his very best to try to replicate the same season that we had last season. But we'll be discussing all of that. We'll be discussing our chances in the Champions League, ideal opponents to come up against, just also as well, why is it that Spurs seem to be such a different team in Europe compared to what we have been domestically in the Premier League, and plenty of other stuff around the transfer window, Cole Mawani potentially staying, not being sold, even though I think a lot of people maybe originally were kind of done with him, even though he did just score the other night. Also, as well, maybe with some of the lack of transfer business, considering that you would say this was going to be a very important transfer window, considering all the injuries, and also as well that a lot of people feel like Thomas Frank isn't really being backed enough for him to truly succeed at Spurs. Whether you like the guy or not, he definitely hasn't been given much backing, it feels like, this January window. So plenty to discuss, plenty to get into, and it's good to have these boys here with us. Colin, Spurs are back again. How did you feel after yesterday's 2-0 win? And also just the idea that it's almost the most Tottenham Hotspur thing ever, right? To be so bad in the Premier League, but then finish 4th in the Champions League.
I don't even know where to start. So first, we'll start at the top. So hello to everyone tuning in. Thanks for joining us. A pleasure to be here every Thursday, venting and having some sort of psychological relief to the trauma that is being a Spurs fan. But yes, we're back, inverted commas. I'm not going to fall for it. I'm not going to fall in love and think that we are back. I definitely feel there's just such a disparity, first of all, in competition strength at this time of the competition and the particular opponents we played last night. That I think we flattered to deceive. Potentially, we should have scored more. So yeah, it's good it's great, and we'll obviously celebrate any victory that comes our way because they're very, very hard to come by. But yeah, we're not back, and I refuse to have my heart broken. We're certainly not back. But it's anything that we can do at this moment in time to reinforce positivity around the playing squad, and it is decimated yet again. I know we're not allowed to talk about injuries anymore, but there's just so many. They have nearly a full squad out now, so you do feel sorry for Frank sometimes. But yeah, we're not back.
Well, I'll get someone to bite at some point on this panel show, hopefully, to start believing again. At least I'm going to try to as best I can, but I'm probably in the same boat as Collins, where it is hard to really buy into this. It's almost just more confusing, really, when it comes to Spurs at the minute. But Jack, are we back? Do you feel the same as we did after the Dortmund win, where you just don't really know what to make of Spurs, to be perfectly honest?
I'm a bit more positive, I think, than the Dortmund game. I think the Dortmund game, everyone was kind of up for it, and the Champions League game come out fast. It was at home as well. I think the away games in the Champions League, we've actually struggled a little bit compared to the home games. I think Monaco away and Bodo Glimt away, they were fairly ugly points we got in that, and PSG away, we played okay, but we conceded 5, so that's never a good thing. So I think that was maybe a step in the right direction more so than the Dortmund game, because we've actually been very good at home in the Champions League so far. But yeah, I thought there was some nice stuff there to see last night. I thought with the players he had available, I thought he actually got a tune out of a lot of them. I thought he got creative with the solutions. It wasn't maybe the predictable sort of dross that we normally see. I thought Paulinho at centre-back, I'd much prefer him actually there, because I think there's a lot less pressure with him on the ball. The way he used Romero, use his passing range, I thought that was very positive. And Kolo Muani actually looked bothered. It seems he only tries against his former teams. I think even Thomas Frank said that after the game. So I guess maybe if we get, I think, are Juventus on our side of the draw?
I think so.
I think
yes, they are.
Maybe if we can draw them, Kolo Muani might come up with the 2 masterclasses in the 2 games. We might be able to beat them similar to how he has against Frankfurt and PSG. So maybe he's worth keeping around just for that's a special operation, as Thomas Frank may call it.
Yeah, hopefully we see PSG in the Champions League final, because then Kolo Muani can start and he can pull off another brace for us. Dave, I mean, it is hard to read into, once again, this Spurs team, because they've been a totally different side in the Premier League. And then to be fourth in the Champions League, I know it's a favorable draw, plenty of easier opponents, but at the end of the day, like only losing once and getting to this position, pretty well, good job by Thomas Frank and the boys at the end of the day. It's honestly kind of confusing.
Yeah, look, I think you got to give credit where credit's due, to be fair. At the end of the day, with the way the fixtures were laid out and some of the fixtures we got, they were favorable to us, but you still have to go and win them games. You still have to put the points on the board. And, at the end of the day, that's what we've done. We've done that, to Jack's point, we've been pretty good at home and away from home. I might not have liked some of the performances like Bodo or Monaco, but at the end of the day, we came out with a result and, all adds up at the end. And that's why we're sitting there fourth. You're just hoping, and from what seems like from what the players and manager and all were saying last night now, that they're going to try and bring that momentum now into the Premier League, and there seems to be a conservative effort to try and get points out of this one, because I do think they do realize that, the last 16 tie will be in March. If we're dragged down into the relegation zone by then, they'll be told by the club to prioritise Premier League safety over trying to give the Champions League goal, Champions League a real goal. We don't have that. We're not in. Like you made the point yesterday, Jack, that the three teams down in the relegation zone this season, or at least West Ham and some of the managers in around there, Sean Dyche with Forest, Postecoglou wasn't up against them last year. These guys have made a living off keeping teams up and stuff, so they'll do everything they can to try and drag us down this month if results don't go our way. So it's imperative that we pick up at least 4 points this month, in February coming up, to try and, so that when the Champions League game comes around, we have enough of a buffer so that we can go full pelt and our team selection isn't dictated. So it's very, very important we have a good month ahead of us and that they do carry that momentum over.
No, you really hope that we don't tank it so much in the Premier League that it could actually hurt any of our confidence and our preparations for the later Champions League game. So this month of February is going to be absolutely crucial. You are spot on. Just going to welcome some people in the house that have come in here nice and early. Thank you, Logan THFC, for your consistent support, my friend. Good to have you in here with us. He's just can't even tell if this is like a shock and awe face or just like a completely like screaming face, basically, knowing that Spurs, like I said, are one of the most confusing teams in football right now. And he's saying, dare I say it, but I'm actually seeing some improvements in the performances, which is good to see. Colin or Jack, would you agree with Logan, or are you also a little bit torn about whether Spurs look any better under Thomas Frank recently?
You can go first, Jack, if you wish.
I think we've looked a bit better maybe in January than we did in November, December, but we've also played some of the worst teams we've played all season in this month, and we've actually not had particularly good results in the league against a lot of teams that we'd expect to beat. Like the Palace game, I think, was the last league game we won. I was looking at their results there. I think they've gone 11 in all competitions without winning. I think the last game they won was against Shells in early December, and as Irish guys, we know the difference between a Premier League team and a League of Ireland team. They would have been expected to win that quite handily. So it's quite a while since they won a game that maybe they would be expected not to. So I think that result even isn't overly impressive. And then the draws with Burnley, the loss to Bournemouth, there's a few other bad ones in there. I think that's obviously cause for concern. Then the Champions League's offered up some sort of respite, but I think February will really show where we're at, and I think we'll pick up a result from one of the games, whether that's a draw in the North London derby, maybe you nick a win against City or Newcastle, nick a win at Old Trafford. I think something will happen, because that's just the way football works. You win games you don't expect to win, and you lose games you expect to win. There's been plenty of times where we've actually been firing on all cylinders, gone into a game and nearly taken it for granted, and then you end up with egg in your face. I think you get the reverse of that a lot of the time as well. And I think people say, well, if you can't beat Burnley, why would you be able to beat Manchester City or Arsenal? Well, that's just not how football works. On a given day, Premier League teams can beat each other. That's just the way it is. So I think I've some optimism going into the month that we might get results, but the performances, I think, are still my major concern going forward. I think that's where I want to see the improvement is with the performances, and maybe then we can talk about getting back on track, particularly if we get a performance and result against Arsenal. I think that would do a lot to feel better about how the situation's going. I think that's always a good remedy for success, is just getting a result against Arsenal, and then suddenly everyone's behind the team and the manager again.
Absolutely. get to some others in here. Thank you again, Logan, for the extra support. Scotty Heinem's in the house. Good to have you, Scotty. Benito saying, thank you, Levy, for giving us Copenhagen, Slavia Prague, Villarreal, and Frankfurt games. Surreal McCoy's, big up Dave, Jack, and the panel. Good to have you. And as well as Paul Brown. Good evening, gentlemen. Hopefully everyone's doing okay. Definitely feeling a lot better after that win. Paul Brown, Sebas Wolf saying at this point, just create the Super League. We'll be better there. It's probably one of the best comments I've seen in a while. Big up Sebas. We also have KMJ, Wayne Bonner. Good evening, folks. Hope you're all well. Time for Frank and the club to step up in the Premier League and get points on the board before we drop too far down the table. Exactly, I think what Dave was sort of alluding to there earlier. Wayne Bonner has Spurs TVs in the house as well. Good to see you. Then we also have Can't Smile saying simply we look different because most part they are just bad teams. I reckon Burnley would have brushed apart Frankfurt. I'm starting to wonder if that's the case. I think really these European teams are, they have the glamour and the gloss, but maybe they don't have the quality.
They don't. Like they do have the quality. They don't have the physicality. It's as simple as that.
For me, I think there's sort of unhidden factors or hidden factors that maybe people don't calculate going into Europe. Like, I mean, with the Champions League, it is sort of self-motivating. It's the biggest stage in club football. Every player sort of wants to be on that stage. And then from the moment these players arrive to the stadium, Jack, when we done the tour, they gave us great detail about, how UEFA sort of take over the stadium that day and put all their stuff in place and all. So you have the branding absolutely everywhere. The build-up is insane. And the iconic team tune, turns the night into a real sort of spectacle. And walking out to that music sort of ignites something in players. Like, you as a fan get inspired by it.
True.
We love hearing it. So you can only imagine the tingle that the players get when they walk out to that. And then also with the Champions League, you are facing new opponents, which adds maybe a bit more excitement or a bit more freshness to, studying the same teams week in, week out like you do in the Premier League. And not only that, the Premier League is more physical, it's more demanding and stuff like that as well. So, there's a lot more to it. But I was also thinking about this today when, because this question keeps popping up. You look at Aston Villa when they walk out in their stadium, they've got fire going, fireworks, absolutely everything. You look at Crystal Palace, they've got cheerleaders. I mean, who wouldn't want that, when you're sitting at the stadium and stuff, right? But
easy, Tiger.
Different clubs are doing different things to try and sort of help the atmosphere and sort of the occasion around the game. Which in turn you would like to think. You look at Aston Villa players, like when you're walking out the tunnel and you see the fireworks going off, the flames going off and stuff like that, it sort of heightens the occasion in the player's mind, if you know what I mean. And it's sort of like when they walk out to that, they're like, it's a big game. We've got to sort of match this energy. And when you look at when Tottenham walk out in Premier League games, it's ridiculous. It's child's play compared to what other teams are doing. So around the Premier League, it's not like the club make a big spectacle of the game beforehand or anything like that. It's all them little minute details that can help heighten the occasion for players and get them up for it that we maybe lack as well.
And the crowd.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Good comment, though. Can't smile without Spurs. With these usernames all just being one word, sometimes it's hard to be able to make them out so quickly. But let's get a little bit onto this performance here. And it was another week, Colin, where Thomas Frank had very few options off of the bench. Dominic Solanke, right, was the only real experienced player that he could bring in. The rest were kids. So how impressive was it that Spurs were able to have such a commanding performance once again, considering the injury crisis?
Yeah, I think he did very, very well to tinker with what he had and put out a team that did what I would deem probably a very professional performance. I think, certainly Frankfurt were there for the taking. What was that stat, Jack, you had in the green room when we were talking? They had conceded how many?
Frankfurt have conceded 42 goals in 19 Bundesliga games and 21 in 8 in the Champions League.
So there you go. So, I mean, they were waiting. They're a dartboard waiting to accept the darts. All we had to do was throw them. So, on one hand, delighted that he was able to get the result that he got. And I do think he did well to do that. But at the same time, I'm thinking to myself with, the relative firepower that we have compared to a Bundesliga team, we perhaps should have scored more. But look, I'll take it all day long. It's all about context, isn't it? We just need to accentuate the positivity for the position that we're in at the moment and accept it as it comes and not be too hypercritical until the dust settles on what is turning out to be quite a very difficult season and a very Jekyll and Hyde season. So, obviously turning in the performances, finishing fourth in the Premier League table is just ridiculous. And then doing what we do in the Premier League week in and week out, which is, well, to put it mildly and very politely, leaves a lot to be desired. But just referring back to what Dave said about performances, and I know that everybody's a bit disappointed because we've had what you might deem on paper as a reasonably easy month playing the lower level or lower position teams, not to offend any other fans that might be watching, versus what we've got coming up in February, which is a lot of higher level teams. I do think context, as I say, probably week in and week out is very important. Those teams that we played have gone on mostly to get some very good results after playing us. So they were on the up. And our level isn't where we want it to be, nor where it should be. But at the same time, we have to accept where our level is. So I think sometimes we probably did a little better than it felt in the moment. And this is obviously after a lot of reflection. As well as, just as Dave was saying, you have the atmosphere and the desire and everything else that goes with it when you're playing these matches, which I think was an excellent point, and it made my point for me nearly. These guys already know they're in a scrap, or they already feel like they're in a scrap. So they're already pedal to the metal and playing as if it really, really matters, whereas perhaps we don't. We're not quite alive to the fact that we're in trouble. We're not quite alive to the fact that this means more. So that'll give them the extra 1% that gets them either the draw or the win against a club like us, who are still finding their feet, suffering a lot of injuries, plenty of toxicity around the club. Plenty of, I heard on another podcast, plenty of number twos rather than one number one around the hierarchy, which I thought was a very eloquent way of putting it. But at the same time, perhaps we should give a little bit more credit, considering what West Ham have gone on to do, what Burnley have gone on to do. Was it Burnley or Bournemouth? I'm trying to think of. But there have been better results for those teams, and Spurs were just part of that better result cluster that they put together. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we will get something from these games in February, just simply because that is the nature of football, simply because our footballing prowess should be able to show itself a little bit better against teams who will let us play. And we do play very well in Europe because they are teams that will let you play, aside from the point that I keep making about the physicality and pace and power of the Premier League versus the European mid-tier teams. Perhaps we'll get a surprise result. But I think, we are going to need players returning from injury. We are going to need Solanke to find good form quickly, and he is, I think. And we need the board or whoever's in charge to get up off their asses and sign some players. We're desperate, and we're nearly. Where are we? 2 days to go.
Yeah, we'll get on to that.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll leave it there before we get on to that. But that's So I think it's there's room for cautious optimism.
And then Jack, I think we'll offer you this question. I'm pretty sure everyone will want their say on, but it's clear that we can perform on the bigger stages. Do you think the Champions League momentum can be carried over to the Premier League and actually try to help us push for a European spot? What is it, that maybe this game can do for us in terms of trying to have a good February? Do you have any confidence after this last result?
I don't have a huge amount of confidence. I feel like we've seen this story probably 10 different times over the last 2 seasons, where we go, can we carry our performance from midweek into the weekend, and then they let us down on the weekend. I think we saw that Europa League last season. We put in a good performance, and then even earlier on the season, when we weren't rotating the full team, we wouldn't carry that performance into the weekend. So I think Colin's phrase of cautiously optimistic was probably the best way to put it. And I think I did see some positive signs from Frank now. Whether he thinks that exact game plan that we used last night is going to work against some Premier League teams, I'm not necessarily convinced that you can kind of physically bully teams. Like, we've got to be a bit more creative than that. I think there's some situations maybe last night where it was quite easy for us, and you don't get that lack of physicality in the Premier League, and I think just teams will be really up for Premier League games. But I think as Dave said, the Champions League games they're so easy to get up for. Like as a fan, you just always feel up for them. Players must feel up for them. You hear that music come on, it sends that sort of makes it hairs on your neck stand up. Like it's just naturally very easy to get up for it. So I think maybe Man City big game, that's big enough game on Sunday. I think they're probably pound for pound maybe the closest thing to maybe a continental side. A couple of sort of smaller, more technical players in their team. So maybe that's something where we can lean into our physicality. And we've seen the last 6 or 7 seasons that we are capable of beating them. We saw earlier on this season we're capable of beating. Colin noticed that there. I missed it myself saying it. But yeah, we've seen we can beat Man City. So I think that is something. And I think the fans will be up for it. We know we have a big February coming. So if we can beat Man City, there's no reason we can't carry the momentum into the rest of the month in the league. But I do think this weekend is our opportunity to capitalise on it. And if we don't win at the weekend, or at least don't get a draw with a good performance, I think then you probably lose all the momentum you've gained. So yeah, I'll sit back and be cautiously optimistic.
Well, we'll hand it over to Dave to see if he can be the resident happy clapper for at least this show, maybe this show only. Dave, do you think any Champions League momentum can be carried over to the Premier League to help us push for that European spot?
It's a difficult one. And the reason why I say that is last year we set a dangerous precedent that it was okay to throw in the towel domestically to go after the Europa League. Now, as a group, as a team, it's very hard then to subconsciously get you out of that, sort of even heading into this season. And I remember when we hired Frank, I remember making a point around that. I think one of Frank's biggest jobs when he came in here was to re-motivate these players in terms of the domestic campaign. And I think what happened last year is almost subconsciously sort of carried over into this season. And I think that's a huge problem. And it's one that you're hoping with some of the words some of the players were coming out with last night about determined to sort of look at the league now and sort of repair that and put it right. You're hoping maybe it's finally click with them, because at the end of the day, a lot of these players want to play European football. Well, you're not going to be playing European football next season unless you start upping your game in the domestic campaign, you know, and go on a real big push to try and claim a European spot out of that. And it's about time these players realize that, and I think they have. So I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have, is that last year we just allowed them to take their foot off the gas when it comes to Premier League, and it feels like it's almost happening again this year, this time around. So that's a big job that Frank also needs to sort out. But also I think you can make the argument in Europe. I think teams respect us a little bit more, whereas I think in the Premier League, no team respects us. They're well aware of our weaknesses. It's well highlighted. It's well documented, you know, and from year, like, you know, we're playing a lot of these teams every single season. So they know more about our mentality and stuff like that. They know if they press us, you can force us into trouble. So it's well documented. So, you know, I think that's also a huge problem. And that's one thing we have to start doing in the Premier League, start winning these games, to start putting the respect back on our name, so that these teams are coming at us or coming into these games with a little bit more cautious, respecting us. Like when we had Kane and Son, you know, teams were coming at us, but would respect the threat, which made our game a lot easier. It made the midfielders' game a lot easier, the back line's game a lot easier, because they had a lot more time on the ball and stuff. And I think we need to get back to that as well.
Well, you're probably right that the teams in the Premier League don't respect us as much, because over the last 2 seasons, last season and this season included, pretty much everybody has beaten us, or at least recently beaten us. So they definitely have some type of confidence against us.
I also just want to take a comment that Shawnee Maddox put in, which I think he's onto something here, to be fair. He says, you know, maybe is the injury crisis actually helping Frank in terms of means he can't tinker with the team and stuff like that, and he's having to put out a consistent lineup out there. And, you know, with that, you are starting to see over the last couple of weeks an upturn in results.
Give him fewer toys, and then Thomas Frank can start to cook, basically. If you give him less options, he actually gets it right.
Suddenly the transfer window looks like genius from the board.
Yeah, give him as little resources and help as possible. Then he'll all of a sudden start cooking. But let's throw this one at you, Colin. And again, maybe something that a lot of people will want to touch on. It is the title of the show. Players have spoken about translating this European mentality that we seem to have into better Premier League performances. So what's missing, do you think, domestically, that just seems to appear only in Europe?
I think Dave has probably answered a lot of that already, which is, a lot of teams will probably respect us a lot more. We are, let's not forget, the Europa League winners from last year. I just think there's quite an easy formula to beat us in the Premier League. So you've got defenses that will sit tightly packed, and just wait for us to get bored knocking the ball around and then to eventually just grind us down, because we don't really have somebody to unlock a defense. I hate all the football cliches, but we don't. We don't have a Madison, a Kulusevski or whatever. Then these guys, without Solanke, which we've missed terribly, the amount of work that man gets through. And before he got injured, and obviously he was injured obviously before I started this, doing this podcast on this panel with you guys. But it's the one thing that I forgot I liked so much about him when I saw him come back. And I can recall myself watching matches just go, wow, look at the amount of work he gets through. And so that destabilizes the other teams. And we haven't really had anybody doing significant harrowing and pressing. And he's a big guy. But it seems to me that in the Premier League, we're quite easy to beat because we can't unlock a packed defence. And we don't really have the power to hit teams on the break. The guys up front are probably a bit small. Compared to the size of and the pace and power of the Premier League defenders. But I think overall, if you just sit back and wait for us to tire ourselves out, you'll eventually get a result, which is what I think I've seen in most of the matches where guys can just afford to do that. We're not really a force to be reckoned with up front. Our front third hasn't clicked in God knows how long. We have got a goal here and there. But with Solanke back, I would hope it would make a difference, but I can't see. Somebody in the chat said it very well. Once they get back to the Premier League, grind, and grind is a great word for that because it really, really is. But I can't see how that the form that we have, other than the mentality that hopefully should come with it, that we can do this. I can't see how it directly translates, not without a bit more time.
Yeah. I also think Jack made a great point as well. I'm not sure the formation we use in Europe is going to work in the Premier League, because Premier League teams are going to put a lot more pressure on us than what Frankfurt did last night. Frankfurt had nothing to play for. They sat off us. It was like a pre-season friendly for them. Premier League teams will look to get in and disrupt that midfield, look to, put more pressure on the wing backs and stuff like that. So I'm not even sure that this system is going to work in the Premier League. And I think the style of football is also a huge problem in terms of you can't score goals, you're bang in trouble. That's just the nature of the game.
I saw this interview, or I think it was a press conference, Jack, from Anthony Gordon, and he was trying to describe the difference between playing in Europe versus the Premier League. He was saying in the Premier League, it is a lot more physical. It is about more transitions, counterattacks, set pieces. And then he said in Europe, it is a bit more of the football of old, a bit more free-flowing, just more enjoyable, he kind of just said, to watch and to play. Do you think there's something to that also maybe just European teams maybe are easier to beat for Spurs just because they maybe lack that physicality, but also they actually do try to play maybe football a bit more?
Yeah, I saw the thing. I actually saw him getting slagged off a lot, saying he was throwing stones from a glass house there with the way Newcastle play with that they love a set piece. They love sitting back there a bit, anti-football at times. Now, they can be quite chaotic at times, but sometimes they're absolutely appalling to watch. And but yeah, I definitely think there's something to that. I think different leagues have different strengths. You look at like Serie A, or the Spanish league, like players are much more technical and they're not as physical. Whereas in the Premier League, like you look at our midfield, like Paulinho, Conor Gallagher, Bentancur, like these guys aren't like top level technicians, but they're really good athletes, stick the foot in, they'll win challenges. Frank's always talking about Gilles. That's such an important thing in the Premier League. Whereas in those other leagues, it's like, the idea is to get enough separation and just basically work your way around the players rather than go through them, essentially. So it's a different way of playing football. And you can kind of see when players come from different leagues, they maybe have that adaptation period, as we've seen with Xavi and with Wirtz. Now, good players can make the transition, but even still, it's not seamless. So yeah, it's just different ways of playing the same sport, I guess, and different attributes. But in Europe, you can kind of bully those teams, especially if they're maybe the likes of the teams we've beaten at home in the Champions League. Like, they're not significantly better than us. Like PSG, they're not the most physical team, but they're so much better than us technically. We didn't really give them a huge amount of problems. But those teams are maybe on our level technically, and then we're just totally different level physically.
And I think
I strongly agree with that comment on it.
Yeah. I think refereeing standards also plays a significant part, definitely. Unfortunately. because you just simply don't get the same tolerance in Europe that you get in the Premier League. So that's why Xavi, I'm not talking down Xavi now for a moment. Certainly not, because I think he will be great, and I think he is great. But that's why Xavi just looks like this absolutely outrageous number 10 in Europe, because he's allowed turn and run with the ball without being put on his arse. Because if they foul him in Europe, which I know they still do, but less frequently, it's a free kick. Simple as. And it's not a free kick, or not a guaranteed free kick, in the Premier League. So refereeing standards also make a difference. So we're allowed to express ourselves, because there's no doubt we are a good squad. There are good players there, and they're allowed to express themselves. You're not allowed to express yourself in the Premier League unless you're an outrageous footballer or your team is ticking and clicking, which we aren't. So that's, it's certainly one of the elements.
Well, referee standards between Europe and the Premier League, at least we get penalties in the European games compared to the Premier League, where we get no help and no favors.
No, we have to be shot before we get a Premier League penalty.
Yeah.
It will still go to a VAR check, and then they'll probably still deny it. I would just say, just to add to, I think, a multitude of reasons why there's such a difference in the performances and the results in Europe versus the Premier League. But I do think part of it has been just the schedule goes where we have just been for the last 2 seasons, just losing game after game after game in the Premier League. But then there is that midweek fixture in Europe where they can use it as a time to bounce back, or at least convince themselves that, okay, we can right the wrongs from the last performance and then play this game midweek. But it's also always going to be a big game, because Dave said, they dress up the whole stadium. There's the music. There's that pressure that goes into it to at least perform in Europe. As long as, performances domestically aren't great, this is another competition. You can have a clean slate, if you will. And I think that's kind of been in the players' mindset for a while now, that they kind of been using Europe as just an opportunity to try to bounce back, but then they just seem to only do it for one game, and they don't carry it over to the Premier League. But it seems like that's become the cycle here, because even under Ange, we had a very similar record where we only lost one game, I think, in the Europa League group stage phases or league phase. And for, the knockout rounds, for the most part, we were able to get past teams, even though we were losing game after game. And same thing is happening under Thomas Frank. It's almost like they use that midweek game as an opportunity to try to convince themselves that they can right the wrongs over the weekend, but then for whatever reason, they just don't carry it over to the next game.
Sorry, actually, Jack, can I just make a quick point? It just popped into my head here. I was reading something about it there earlier on, or last week, I think, after the Dortmund game, that there was a theory that there's the atmosphere in the stadium for the home league games. It's all the same season ticket holders, 35,000 of them, whereas the Champions League games are in addition to the season tickets. And there's probably a lot of those season ticket holders that at the moment are saying, I'm not going to take up those tickets. And it's actually a different lot of fans coming into the stadium that are perhaps creating a more positive atmosphere. I'm not saying either is right or either is wrong, and that's not having a go with season ticket holders.
Just a factor.
Totally understand the frustration, but like even the Dortmund game, like it just felt like I wasn't at the game. I was watching it on TV. It really felt like the players could express themselves. It felt like the stadium was behind them. Whereas the West Ham game at the weekend, like the fans were like looking for a reason to get in their back, which is totally understandable where we are, how much money you're paying. You're talking about people paying £1,000 for a season ticket, and what they've seen 3 home league wins in the last 12 months. Like that's £330 or something per win. Like that's, you can understand people getting frustrated. Whereas someone that's maybe gone to 3 or 4 matches a season, that's really looking forward to this. I remember my first few times going over to Tottenham, like you couldn't sleep the night before. You were really looking forward to it. Yeah. Now that I go over a bit more regular, it's a bit more routine. You don't get that same excitement. Like you're not as up for the game. Whereas those fans, like it's such a treat for them to go to those games. And the European games, often it's a lot easier to get the tickets, so you can plan forward. So I think there is something perhaps to that maybe the fans at the stadium for the European games are a different group to the ones at the league games.
What I'd also suggest on that is, I think you do sort of raise a fair point there, Jack, is I think sometimes, the manager and the players sort of need to realise that sometimes a lot of their frustrations, because the owners never roll themselves out in front of the public for the public to actually let them know what they think of them and how they're running the club and stuff like that. And as you've seen a couple of weeks ago, when a guy tried to approach Vivian, they just run off. They don't want to engage and stuff like that.
But
So
Dave, I think that was a fella who had probably 7 or 8 points and is towering over Vivian.
No,
Lewis.
100%.
I don't think that's right that you go up to her. I know she's worth probably £500 million and she's not doing a very good job in her role, but I think approaching an older lady and towering over her with a few drinks on you, that's very intimidating. You don't like to see that either, but I do agree with I agree with the overall point though of like they go hiding when things are bad and they come out then when things are great and pat themselves in the back.
No, I do get what you're saying. Like, I'm not saying the way he approached her or anything is correct. I think if he would approach her in maybe a less calmer manner, no drinks, he might have had more of a civil conversation with her around her, stuff like that. She might not have been scared and running off and stuff like that. But I think the overall point I'm trying to make here is the fact that sometimes the booze and the frustrations isn't always just aimed on the players or the managers solely. Sometimes, they are the public representations of the club when they're out there in front of the fans. And sometimes they're taking the heat for the owners and for what the club don't do and all the missed promises and stuff like that. And you see all that sort of built up then and exploding on match days when results don't go well. So it's not always just directed at the players. Sometimes they're the only ones where fans can vent their frustration at what's going on in the football club in general.
Yeah. Just in his case, though, I do feel like I don't know. Maybe I think the glass of wine, in his hand was probably just a bad look. Who's to know whether he really did have, 8 or 9 pints or something. It's just sometimes when you see someone with a glass of alcohol on them, it just then you make assumptions, really. But I agree. Maybe the way he conducted himself wasn't great, but he was in that section that was like the $40,000 or $20,000 like a year type of section. You would imagine that being in that section entitles you to some sort of type of frustration if you're watching that week in, week out.
I think where he is, you've got to pay 3 years up front as well to get in there, So it's, this was all explained to us on the club tour. It's something like 30 grand a year or something like that. You pay 3 years in advance. It's madness. It's expensive.
I would also just say that maybe Jack has made a good point there that there could be a different demographic between the midweek games that are late at night versus the weekend games. I mean, if you're a parent bringing your kids or in general, just the mood, you don't want to have your weekend ruined. Whereas midweek games, you're probably okay with having your Wednesday or your Tuesday ruined, not as much your weekend that Spurs continue to do in the Premier League at least. But we're going to welcome some people in. And then, by the way, everybody, as you're coming in, do smash the like button for us. We would appreciate it. And if you want to do what Logan THFC has done and support the channel, we'd appreciate that as well. And there will be time at the end of the show for all the members that have been popping in to answer any of your guys' questions. So do consider becoming a member as well. He sent in a diamond. And I think he had another comment there, which I'm trying to find. But once I do, I will bring it up. But do really appreciate you, Logan. We also have the likes of K32, who's joined us. Good to have you back with us, Kieran. Fantasy McShane is in here. Harmless Potato. Good to have you, Harmless. Trinbad saying, tell you lads, plan is be the first team to win the Champions League and get relegated the same season. Come on, Spurs. We're just breaking records, Trinbad. That's the whole purpose. Good to see you, AK Shags. Stephen J. Cam say, evening, guys. I've just joined the conversation. Agree with Dave. If we want to make a fist of the Premier League and the Champions League, we need to start improving that atmosphere of Frankfurt fans singing despite the performance. I think that's just the case. So the German fans are a bit like the Turkish fans, where they're just kind of just nonstop really for 90 minutes. Sometimes I wonder if they even know that there's a game of football going on. They just seem to just enjoy the singing and the camaraderie.
I think also, though, when people compare us to European fans, a lot of them European clubs have ultras. It's a different ball game. You don't have that in the UK. It's different culture and all that altogether.
Yeah.
And the ultras are usually the one that is generating that atmosphere, the singing for 90 minutes, the flares coming out, the tops off. It's usually the ultras that are leading that. You don't have that in the Premier League. Why? Because the government choose to try and stamp that out when all the football violence and all that was a massive problem. So that's why you don't have that in England. And
then Shemtan is in the house. Good to have you, Shemtan. Hopefully you enjoyed a kebab last night with a good win. John Fitzpatrick has joined us. Good to see you, Johnny. Sully 1882 as well. The one and only We Are Spurs TV. Tom THFC saying Dom's finish last night was a Harry Kane finish. Hopefully he keeps it up and comes good for us. Dave even said that, to be fair, actually, which was very, very complimentary, especially coming from Dave, Harry Kane's biggest fan. Tartan Spurs up in Scotland. Good to see you as well.
with the Slanky finish, how many times have we seen players in the box take 5-6 touches trying to get the ball out of their feet? Slanky, one touch away from the centre back.
And outside of the boot as well. It was beautiful.
Yeah, one touch away from the centre back, which then gives him time to pick his head up, look at the goal, pick his spot, and then execute it with his strike. That's what all strikers at this level need to be doing. One touch and bang. It's what Harry Kane done. It was an absolute brilliant finish from Solanke yesterday. More of that.
Yeah. And then Beto 18 or Beto A77, appreciate you saying love to be back on the membership. Sent in a super sticker as well. Just sending heart emojis, loving the channel. Thank you very much, Beto. And in case you did want to come on the show, I think next week there will be a fan call-in show. We do it at least once a week. And it should be on Monday unless something crazy were to happen. So hope to have you with us on Monday, Beto. But we always do one at least once a week. So good to have you here with us. A little bit of a tactical discussion here, Colin. Thomas Frank used a 3-4-3 system again. Do you think it's working in Europe, whereas in the Premier League it hasn't been? He used it, I think, against Burnley just recently. It didn't yield the results that we would have liked. What do you make of this change to this back three formation? Do you think it's the right one for him to go for?
Well, certainly in Europe. I don't think he had much choice, though. It looks very fluid in certain phases of the game. I missed the first half, I have to say. Matters domestic trumped me on that one, but I did see the second half. And it did look good. It looked a lot of the players looked comfortable in it. I don't think it'll translate to the Premier League. I know we keep talking about that, but yeah, I quite enjoyed it. I didn't feel the same level of anxiety when I'm watching them, and certainly the each segment of the team was connected, and they were certainly creating opportunities, and they were certainly disciplined enough to snuff out any opportunities that Eintracht Frankfurt were trying to generate. So yeah, I would certainly be a fan of that if we can keep that up in Europe. But I've no hope for it in the Premier League.
Yeah, I'm just not sure how it's going to work when it comes to the Premier League. Like last night, up until that goal came from that sort of set piece routine that we done, we were pretty toothless going forward in terms of, like, don't get me wrong, I think in terms of being able to secure the possession all the way up until the opposition box, it works when you're just moving it side to side and stuff like that. But like last night, one of our big problems, especially in the first half, was Udogie and Spencer pushed up higher than Udeber and Xavi Simons. And then with Udeber and Xavi Simons playing more inside, they're small guys. When you're playing inside through the middle, you're playing up against more physically stronger men than you. So there's only so much you can do in there. And then plus, when we crowd it the way we do, because we also pop Matasar in there, plus the other two deep line midfielders sort of pushing up, with all them bodies we have in there, they're also bringing in bodies then to sort of circumvent that and stop us from playing in there. So you're actually taking your best creative players out of the game, and you're leaving it largely on Destiny Udogie and Jed Spence. I just don't see how this is going to work long-term moving forward unless there's a change to this sort of system. For me, there's just nowhere near enough creativity within this system to go and win games consistently. I think it actually stifles our best players. Like Mwani last night, Barry's goal, I think there was one or two times we had a small bit of intricate playing with him around the box. But what do we expect them to do largely outside of that when we are in possession of the ball and taking the game to the team? When it's so crowded in there, there's no space for the guy to be able to operate in. And then a lot of times when we got it out to the left-hand side, Destiny Udogie refused to cross. And then when we got it out to the right-hand side, and especially with Porro injured now, how many times did Spence give it away last night? You know what I mean? So for me, when I look at this formation, I just don't see how it's going to work long-term without it boring the teats off Tottenham fans, to be brutally honest with you.
Jack, I know you're not a fan of, maybe the 3-4-3, or maybe I'm making assumptions, but I know you're a tactical guy. What have you made of this system change by Thomas Frank? Do you think it will work in the long term, or do you see it not working in the Premier League?
I think in the Premier League, I'm kind of with Dave on it. I think perhaps I'm wrong, but I think there's a few issues with it. Like, I think with Thomas Frank's emphasis on winning second balls, I think Xavi and Adebayor, if they're trying to feed off second balls that maybe Solanke is going up for an aerial duel, ball comes loose, they're not two guys that you really want scrapping for second balls up there. You've seen how he's used Bergvall and Sarr throughout the season, getting them high up the pitch, but those two guys, that's just not their game really. Their game is getting their foot on the ball, keeping it on the ground and moving it quickly. But I guess there's probably some positives that you could speak of. I think it gets Xavi and Adebayor close together, and when you saw there when Adebayor hit the post, they had a lovely little link-up bit of play I think it maybe lends itself to something like that. They're the sorts of players that can go one touch. Solanke can do that as well. So maybe when you're sustaining that bit of pressure, it works, and you have the two wing backs high up, Udogie and Spence. I think, I guess, as positives, and I thought we saw last night, there was maybe a 10-15 minute spell where we had the ball on the edge of the Frankfurt box nearly for the entirety of the period, which is something we haven't really seen much of. I think that's something maybe we've lacked, is our attacks maybe have been, you might see one attack and then you don't see one for 7 or 8 more minutes, where it was just like we were constantly pinning them back under pressure. And I think that was after we had scored the opener. I think it was early second half. I think that's maybe an underrated way of managing a game, is keeping the ball high to pitch, keeping a team pinned back, while also being wary of them coming back at you. So I think maybe from that point of view, if we're ahead, it means we don't have to sit back, that we can get guys high up the pitch now. And we have 3 centre backs, and then what was it, Sarr and who was in midfield? Sarr there yesterday?
Sarr,
Gray. Yeah, Sarr and Gray are back there. So you have 5 guys kind of back, and you have 5 guys forward that can maybe maintain that pressure. So I guess from that point of view, it's maybe a positive. But then from the build-up point of view, I think sort of having those 3 centre-backs, 2 in front of them, and then the wing-backs in the front 3 ahead of them, I think maybe Premier League teams are just going to struggle to progress the ball in those situations. I think maybe if you get Basuma in there, he can receive the ball under pressure, get through a press, but I don't really want to be relying on Basuma for our entire build-up play, because he has a bit of a tendency to do something mental, and we can't really rely on him. But I think as well, with when you have sort of the striker, 2 wingers, and a number 10 as Xavi, like, it allows Xavi to drop deep, and you still have 3 players forward. Whereas if Xavi drops deep, you only have 2 guys up top. I think it just leaves you a bit light if Xavi gets the ball forward, and then it's 2 guys against the whole defence. So I think from just numbers point of view going forward, I think it probably presents some sort of issues going forward. But I'd be delighted to be proven wrong. And I think against Man City, I think it makes a bit of sense. But going forward after that, I'm not too confident that it's the way forward, to be honest.
I think where it could work, and I know people are probably going to ridicule me when I say this, so I'm just prepared for it. But, rather than leaving Jed, Spence and Udogie on the outside as natural wing backs, and leaving them higher up the pitch than, say, Xavi and Udabur, and leaving the burden of the creativity on them to get the ball through into the middle for like Moani, and why not push Udabur and Simmons out there and just get Spence and Udogie to occupy the space inside and drag bodies in, if that's what you want. So that way, when you get the ball to out wide right, or when you get the ball out wide left, they have the craft to be able to create something, beat their man, go on the inside or the outside, put delicious balls in the box. When you're playing them inside the way he did last night in the first half, it just completely nullified them to a large degree. They couldn't get any space or time on the ball. Every time Simmons and Udabur were getting the ball, they were having to come backwards. You're putting 2 small guys in there up against usual 6-foot odd guys built like a shit brick house. You know what I mean? It's just a mismatch altogether. You're actually eliminating a lot more of the impact that they can have on a game. So for me, if it is going to work, that's something he will have to change and invert Destiny Udogie and Jed Spence and use Simmons and Udabur more out wide. And I reckon people would cane me for that, because they didn't like the inverted fullbacks under Ange Postecoglou. But I'm not asking them to, Frank's not asking them to bomb forward into the box and all. He's just asking them to stand inside and occupy space, so that when we rotate the ball from left to right, eventually when we do that, we'll get space down one side. But the problem is, Jed Spence lost the ball how many times yesterday? Udogie refused to go on the outside of his man. But the whole idea with this system is when you create that space, you attack into it and you put the ball in the box. But your 2 wing backs were sort of hesitant to do that. So that's one change you'll have to make. And also, why Jack brought up centre midfielders. I don't want to hear any Spurs fan complaining about a lack of progressive passing in that midfield this season. Because, I've heard the same with no matter who plays in there. At what point do people actually look at the tactics that we don't play through the middle? Frank doesn't want a progressive passer. He just wants guys in there that can rotate that ball from left to right and also try and win second balls or pull down counterattacks if they're breaking out. So he's not requiring that skill set of progressive passer. I don't want to hear any more of it around Bentancur, around Paulini, around Gray, around Papa Matasari. He's the latest one last night to sort of be pulled out for that and stuff. It's not a requirement Frank is asking him to do. He simplified the centre midfielder's game, just to the point where it's rotate to the left, to right, and pull down counterattacks. So I think that's an understanding people need to have around Thomas Frank's tactics.
Yeah, I mean, everything in Frank's tactics, from whether it's a back three, back five, or if it's been a back four, it's just moving it from left to right, sideways until you get it into a decent area in the wide area and then try to create something from there. Very little times do you actually see us even want to attempt to create anything through the middle, because I think he's scared is that if you turn it over in the middle of the park, then it's easier for a team
You're
to
broke
probably
on.
transition and counterattack on, especially if you only have two midfielders in there anyway with a 3-4-3. You do probably have to be very careful about playing some of those progressive passes through the middle. But the other bit of evidence towards it is under the previous manager, our progressive passing numbers were ridiculous, some of the best in the league of any of our midfielders. And if he was able, Ange Postecoglou, to get guys like Bentancur, guys like Sarr, etc., the rest of the team to play through the middle quite often, it just is the case that Thomas Frank isn't a big fan of it. We'll see if it works out for him, but it'd be nice if we played that way a bit more
It's
often.
just, I think this season, a lot of the conversation around the midfielders have been they're not good enough, they're not progressive enough and stuff like that. Whereas I think people actually need to look at the tactics and look at the requirements and what they're asked to do.
Lily White's India is saying 3-4-3 can work, but not the way Frank plays it. More rotations needed instead of rigid roles. Play our creators wide in a 3-5-2 kind of attack, or maybe he's saying going forward, sort of have more or less like 5 players up there, including the wing
That's what you were
backs.
saying, Dave.
Yeah,
more or less.
Sounds like you're on the same page there, Dave.
You got, yeah, well, Lily White, India, just for me, it's just like, that's one thing I was livid with last night is the two fullbacks are higher than Xavi and Udebur, and they're the guys you paid big money to come in and be that creative spark, and you're just nullifying them by pushing them inside. Do that with the fullbacks and put them out on the outside, and you create more chances playing this system. Yeah. It's not rocket science. In fact, get rid of all the coaching team and just put me in there.
It potentially points towards, I don't want to be hypercritical of Thomas Frank, but his smaller club mentality, that the quality of player he's playing with, he doesn't want to push progression through the middle because he is afraid of being broke on, but they're talented enough to retain and create, but he's not doing that.
He almost seems to be doubling down on the Brentford style of play now. Yeah. Now that he knows he's under pressure as well, he doesn't maybe feel like he needs to, because he just needs to save his own job. He just needs to get results. So I remember during Brentford's time, they played back 3, back 5 quite often, and it was pretty dull to watch and wasn't really an exciting brand of football, even though when he first came in here, that was the whole remit, was to, of course, compete in all competitions, but still play an attacking style. Now that he's under so much pressure, he's probably thrown out the window. He's like, I don't care about attacking style anymore. I need to actually win some games. So he's gone back to his bread and butter, more or less, at Brentford.
Well, that's why Reguilon had a revival when he went to Brentford, because his role was simple: get down the byline and cross the ball. And he had a mini revival there at Brentford.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, he was trying to do that with Jed Spence and Udogie, but neither of them can really cross from deep areas compared to a Reguilon or a Pedro Porro. You're going to come in though, Jack?
Yeah, I was just going to add to Colin's point just about Frank just bringing his Brentford mentality. I think you see it in his press conference. I think his press conferences, they say a lot. I think he was, before the Frankfurt game, he was talking about, Frankfurt are such a good team. They bring great intensity. They're so good in the break. And while I understand you have to study the opposition you're playing against, I think he has this obsession with trying to stop the opposition, whereas good teams are more concerned with imposing their style on the opposition. Like, for all the criticism we may have of Arsenal, that they're dependent on set pieces, Arsenal know that's their bread and butter. They don't go, oh, well, this team's really good at defending set pieces, so we're not going to rely on them as much. They say, no, we're good enough to impose this on you, and we're going to do it come hell or high water. Pep famously is very stubborn. He'll play his football. He'll buy whatever players it takes to play that football. And I just think that's the top sort of mentality you need to have. Perhaps you have the rare occasion where you come up against the likes of a PSG or a Man City who are on top form, and you have to maybe go, well, this is a team that's a lot better than us. But teams like Burnley, Frankfurt, Bournemouth, I don't see any reason we can't impose a set style on them. And for all the criticism of Ange, everything Ange did was about playing his football, and that's just the way it was. And I think that just, maybe Ange wasn't the right man for us, but someone that's that convinced of their ideas, I think, is what we need to elevate us back to that top level. And that's what Pochettino did for so many years. He tweaked it over the years. It's like, if we got counterattacked, if we were getting counterattacked on, he brought Davinson Sanchez in. Davinson Sanchez might not have been the perfect player, but he was like, well, if we're going to get countered on, he's got a bit of recovery speed. He might not have been Mickey van de Ven, quality-wise or pace-wise, but that was just him trying to solve a general problem rather than trying to tinker with the game to game. And I think for all the talk of Frank rotating the team all the time, I think him changing his tactics the whole time, I think is far more damaging. I think you look at Man City or Arsenal, they can rotate the players in or out, but at the end of the day, like Madueke comes in for Saka, he's playing the same role as Saka, so I don't think that's really a huge issue. I think Saka's able to come out and then come back in, and Madueke can come in from and perform the role adequately. It's just when you're saying to your right winger, I need to play this way this week and this way the next week, and you're just confusing the role. I think that's where it starts to become an issue with the rotation, being the rotation of the roles rather than the players. So that's kind of where I stand on it. I think he just needs to pose our style. But just one quick point, and then I'll let Jack move on. I'm sure he's itching to get onto the next question. But Dave, just you were talking about the central progression, and I was having a conversation earlier on to someone, hypothetically, if we could get Adam Wharton, do you think Thomas Frank would change the way he played? No. I think he'd be like, it's too much of a risk to take with someone that's going to look to just constantly play progressive passes to the center of the pitch. I think that's just the way he is. I don't think it's a personnel thing. And I do have my criticisms of the personnel in there, but I think it is just the way Frank wants to play.
He loves a recycler.
Even in the 3-4-3, it's just so rigid going forward. But attacking play is about taking risks, creativity, craft. And it's so rigid, it's so in control. Like, even in possession, he wants to take low risks. You know, it's just the way he views football is, like you perfectly said, it's just not for a big club. You know, big club is about going to the opposition and opposing your ideas, almost being a team that people admire and want to be like. That's your aim as a big club. This guy, you know, he just sets up to worry about the opposition, regardless of the level of the opposition as well. And usually when we go in at halftime winning, like Dortmund and like some other games, he then in the second half, he just reverts back to controlling the game. Spurs fans want to see their team kick on, go and try and get the third, go and try and get the fourth. He just isn't the right fit for this football club.
I think most of our struggles come from the needle just being too far in the red with any of the managers that we've had.
Yeah.
You know, so you take Ange, and he was just absolutely belligerently uncompromising in his way, other than the Europa League, funnily enough, where we played almost an entirely different style of football, which delivered a trophy. So see what you can do when you compromise your ideas to suit the jigsaw puzzle that you have in front of you. Yeah. So like the people were driven mad by Ange because he just wouldn't let go of he was wedded to this way in the Premier League, which just wasn't working. And nobody's asking you to go from black to white. They're just simply asking you to adapt. And now we've got another manager who's just completely the other way, again in the red. Adapt. And now we've got no identity. So if we could just find somebody who was just some way flipping normal, who has an identity, who has a style of play that can manage the threat that comes from the whatever opposition we're going to play in a composed fashion, instead of being absolutely wedded to a particular way of thinking and acting, then, you know, I suppose we'd all want that. But I mean, just take a look at Leeds. Look what Leeds have done. You know, they found a formation that worked for them, and they've gone from strength to strength. But they are adapting each time they play, or they're adapting their style a little bit each time they play. But ultimately, their style is pressure, up and at you, in your face, exciting, keep progressing the ball. And they do that really, really well because they have a style, they have a personality, and we don't. We just have nothing. We're just sitting there the whole time waiting for the opposition to do something because we're afraid of our lives. But it's too far the opposite direction compared to where Ange was, and he was too far in the other direction.
Well, I completely agree with the pendulum swing point that you're making, Colin. I think that is what Spurs have been guilty of so many times. But what's funny is that Thomas Frank was given this PR by a lot of people who did want him in, that he was supposed to be that guy that could sort of go between the styles, you know, be adaptable, be a flexible tactician. But that's just proven not to be the case this season, really. He is on the other end of the spectrum compared to Ange Postecoglou.
But I can't blame him, to be honest. You know, he's been under the cosh since he came in. So,
also, one thing I think Colin said that I think is absolutely spot on is nowadays you got a lot of managers wedded to what they want to do, and they'll just walk into a club and copy and paste it. But a real good manager adapts that slightly according to what he's got. He can always have his view. I want to play on the front foot football like Ange, but he should have realised we don't have the clinical players to finish off a lot of the moves, so he does have to set something up a little bit more defensively. Just adapt it slightly. You know, with Thomas Frank, he has better players at Tottenham than what he had at Brentford to work with. So he should be adapting a little bit more on the front foot, you know, and stop being such a pragmatist and stuff like that. You're not asking these guys to change their ways, but you're asking them to just adapt to what we've got here at Tottenham Hotspur, and they're failing to do so. But that you know, to Colin's point, the big problem is the owners should set what style and identity they want on the pitch, and everything else should follow in terms of your scouting, your recruitment, your manager. Everything else should follow what you want your club to be. But when the owners don't set that precedent, that's why you're wedded to what Vinay brings in. That's why you're wedded to what manager, you know, Paratici was bringing in the past and stuff like that, because they're the ones actually dictating the style of football that we play.
Yeah. I agree with what also Jack said earlier, in that maybe simplify the style so that you can repeat it in majority of the games. And if you were to do it like Arsenal, just get as many corners as possible, and that's the way that you can score. Basically, that's what they do.
That's another thing.
That's the whole reason. That's the whole plan with them, is just get as many corners as possible.
But that's another thing where Thomas Frank misjudged this job at Brentford. He had 7 days or 6 days on the training pitch between each game. He could change and get the team ready and prepared for it and get them well drilled in it at Tottenham. And I said this at the very beginning when we hired him. He's going to have 1 day between games when the calendar really kicks in. What can he do to be able to adapt to the opposition and stuff? He would have to come in and insert a style of play that is easily rolled out every sort of 3 days, you know, and that's where he's completely misjudged the situation, Thomas Frank.
Beto from earlier had this, and he's saying he is a great manager, but it just sucks to see that we are down in terms of the tools. I think he means that he has available to him, and our ownership just won't invest in the manager. Probably spin this question here, Beto. Really appreciate your support, by the way, and then we'll finish off, of course, on, you know, maybe which teams we would like to face. But just maybe quickly on the transfer window here, Colin. I mean, do you have any confidence that Spurs are going to be signing another player? And, you know, I felt like at the beginning of the window, unless I'm mistaken, a lot of people did want Spurs to sign another winger or at least another forward. From what I can tell, that doesn't seem to be happening.
It's horrifying. Quite simply, just horrifying. And the problem is that I, like a lot of other Spurs fans, would have gobbled up the what has now just turned out to be empty words from the new direction of ownership, rather than new ownership, because it's still Enoch, it's still the Lewis family. But I just think it's been diabolical. I can't understand. I mean, it's always about context. Arsenal, I don't think, have signed anybody.
Did they really need to, though? Yeah,
no, I don't think they did. But I mean, if you were a title-chasing side, if we were in that position, we'd be going bananas because we hadn't signed anybody to support our, you know, title run-in. Yeah, so Probably. They haven't signed anybody. There was some other big side I remember reading they hadn't signed, but it won't come to me. But anyway, aside from what other people are doing, and I appreciate that January can be difficult, but we needed help. The squad needed help, and I know there's still 48 hours left or whatever, but it's been absolutely diabolical. I mean, we sell before at the very, very beginning, literally as the transfer window opened, Brennan Johnson was gone. You know, and you're effectively, well, I know he's having a torrid time there, but from our perspective in that moment, you were thinking we're helping a club who are in and around us. It's not as if you're selling to somebody who's way down the table. And, you know, Conor Gallagher is a good signing. Is he what we really needed? Probably not, but, you know, happy to have him. And there's an unproven, I can't remember what side he plays on, left back or right back now, in Sousa. Left back, thank you. Unproven, so he's not an immediate fix for any problems we have right now. So I am absolutely horrified by our window. Absolutely horrified. And going back on what I would have said 6 or 7 weeks ago about, you missed that one as well, Jack, about Kolu, and I thought he was a great fella and he was putting himself about. He can absolutely get in the bin. I know he scored in Europe last night, but in the Premier League, get in the bin. If I know he was linked with going back to Juventus. Go, I'll drive him there. He's doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. Giving up on that ball. I know it's all been said, but he is a heartbreaker for me because I thought he had a lot of promise. He was playing for us with a broken bone in his face and everything. Where he just fell off a cliff. He just fell off a cliff. So he can get in the bin. But yeah,
He's back now.
yeah, we're so back. But yeah, for me, in summary, and I'm happy to revise this once the transfer window, as Sky Sports like to say, slams. It doesn't gently close. It slams shut. I'd be happy to take a revisionist view of what I've just said. But for me, my only word to describe this is horrifying. We are in the doldrums. We needed help. They have done the square root of F all to help that team, in my humble opinion. Conor Gallagher aside.
Jack, I mean, do you have anything to say on just the transfer window? Because this is supposed to be a very important one if we're to survive this relegation battle, but then also try to help Thomas Frank as much as he can, and felt like a lot of people wanted a forward in the beginning of the window.
Yeah, I agree with everything Colin says, but I kind of take a different point of view of it. The Johnson thing, if they were going to sell Johnson, they had to have a replacement lined up, which, unless they thought they were getting Semenyo for some reason, it just made no sense whatsoever. Either keep Johnson or make sure you have a replacement ready to go. I think that's simple as. But at the same time, as much as I'd like to see the back of Kolo Muani, I'm seeing us linked to Mateta for 40 million. Like, I don't think you make one mistake and try and fix it by making another mistake and signing a guy who's nearly 29, is out of form. He's apparently been carrying an injury for the last 2 months, so you wouldn't be expecting him to hit the ground running. So I think January, while there's the temptation to maybe panic and go out and buy someone, I don't think the situation is dire enough to just go and say, oh, we're just going to buy this player for the sake of it. We need to stay in the Premier League. I think we've enough of a buffer where we can go, let's not panic here. And like, I'm sure I'll be proven wrong and we'll probably do nothing good in the summer, but I'd rather wait till the summer than make the wrong move now and have to move someone on in 6 or 12 months' time going, why on earth did we buy them? I think we stumbled into someone like Kevin Danso, who's actually proven to be quite good last January. But the January before that, we stumbled into Dragusin, who I think isn't a bad player, but was absolutely horribly suited to the football we were playing. And I think that was a classic case of us saying, we need a centre-back who's available, buy him and don't think any more about it. I think sometimes there needs to be more thought put into it and you end up then signing someone 12 months down the line to replace them. So I think while I would have loved to have signed someone, maybe you say, well, let's overpay for someone like Enjoy off Everton. Maybe you think he's a 50 million player and you pay 75 million for him. I'd much rather do that than buy someone for 40 million who you want to move on in 12 months' time. I think that's my point of view. And I'd rather overpay for the right player than get someone for half the price that isn't the right player. That's kind of where I'd take it. But I acknowledge January is a very tough month to do business, and maybe it's squad building from the summer that has caused us issues in January with the injuries on top of that. So I think the summer is where you do your business and maybe January is where you get the stopgaps in. I think I'd be delighted with maybe a loan or two and maybe get Andy Robertson in. I think that's possibly still on the table if Roma can get a replacement for Simicast so he can go back to Liverpool. Maybe that's something that gets done. But yeah, I just don't want to see us panicking and ending up messing up this squad even more, because I think there's been a lot of mistakes made with the squad building over the last 3 or 4 years anyway. So I think adding to that is just going to cause further problems down the line.
That's absolutely spot on. I think, in terms of the transfer window, what you can't do is panic, and get yourself into a situation like, we brought Kinski and players like that in January, and now we're looking to move them on and stuff like that. And all you're doing is sort of just making your squad even more, your business even more complicated come the summer and stuff like that. At the end of the day, if we were to bring in another Sousa signing and the club were like, well, you asked for signings, that's all we can attract, that's all we can get in, fans will be in absolute uproar. But when you look at players like at this moment in time, it's about buying in better than what we've currently got. How many of them players of that caliber are actually going to want to come to Tottenham Hotspur right now? And if you're a forward player, and I keep reiterating this, why would you want to come in and play under Frank, given how poor we are going forward? And some of the players he's been given to try and rectify this problem and stuff at Tottenham Hotspur. But, you know, when you see Colin Mawani banging goals all around Europe, comes to Tottenham, they suddenly dry up. You see Xavi Simons ripping it up all around Europe, comes to Tottenham, it dries up to a large degree. Why would no player would see Frank as a guy that is going to enhance their game, bring more goals and assists to their game and make them better and improve them? So there's that other added thing. Like, you know, if players don't want to come here, what can we do at this point?
And you could also say that Jack is right by bringing up a lot of the signings that we did in the past in January were more opportunistic signings, and that just might be the sad reality of the January window. You don't have a ton of options available, so then the ones that you do sign might not really be the ideal fit, and that could have been the case with Matisse Tell. As much as Matisse Tell looks good now, he definitely wasn't the right choice for what we needed at the time. Same thing with Dragishin. The only one that was really good was, like you brought up, Kevin Danso, but that's the other issue with January, is that you might end up doing a panic buy, but also the only ones that are usually available are just opportunistic guys that are just wanting out of their club, but it's not really a great sample size of players to really work with.
And the thing is, we're only sort of after really clearing the backlog that Steve Hitchen, done at Tottenham Hotspur. How many senior players on large wages did we have to loan out, pay out contracts, this, that, and the other, because we got the squad into one big mess because we were just bringing in bang average player after bang average player rather than upgrade. We can't afford to get into that mess again, because if you do it this January in the summer with budgets and wage budgets and everything else, it's just going to ruin the summer business.
Last and final question for you guys, and then we'll finish off with some member stuff. Colin, ideal opponent that you would like to come up against in terms of, you have Juventus, Galatasaray, as well as Atletico Madrid, and then Club Brugge.
I think I'd fancy Galatasaray just because I think it'd be a lot of aggro. I'd like to see us try and perform under that duress. I think that'll be a tasty one.
The away game is first now in that leg, so you know what happened out there last year.
Oh, I can't remember what happened out there last year.
In fairness, it only finished 3-2.
It's a basketball game, if you remember.
Oh, yes, I remember now.
Red card from Lancashire.
Yeah, forgotten about that, actually. Yeah. Maybe I'll change my mind.
Yeah.
No. Galatasaray would be a good one. Yeah, I wouldn't mind that. Or Juve, but Galatasaray would be a good one to get.
Okay. All right. Club Brugge, by the way, I did some of my research, and they have actually looked incredible, like in the Champions League. I do now recall some amazing wins that they've had. So as much as they're probably not the biggest name on paper, they do look like a decent side this season. They're playing some nice stuff and have taken some scalps this, Champions League so far. So they're not as easy as you might think. But Jack, any preferences?
Anyone but Atletico Madrid. I do not want to see Simeone playing against Thomas Frank. You could play for 10 years and we probably wouldn't see
Liquid football, what do you mean?
One chance over 180 minutes.
Yeah, it'd be like, do you ever play foosball and the ball gets caught in a point where you can't hit it? That would be what that would be like. It'd just be so frustrating to watch, just playing for throw-ins and corners, and it would drive us insane, I'd say. Yeah. And we'd probably end up 0-0 across 2 legs and lose on penalties. But I think for the away day, I think going to Bruges would be fairly cool. I think that's supposed to be a lovely spot. So if I was to say you were handing me an away ticket now for one of the games, I think Bruges would be the place to go, just because that's a place I kind of wouldn't mind going. So I'll say that anyway. And as you said, they have actually been quite good. So I think you couldn't take it for granted. But at the same time, it would peg us as slight favourites going into the tie, especially with the second leg at home, knowing what we have to do under the lights. Fans will be up for it. It's not like a league game against West Ham where there's tension in the air. It's more opportunity and people thinking, geez, we're 90 minutes away from a Champions League quarter-final. Did we think we'd be here a couple of months ago? Probably not. So.
Dave, I think you agree with Jack, unless you changed your mind from yesterday.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just don't want Atletico because they are sort of seasoned pros within in the Champions League. They know how to grind out results. I'm not sure we're at that level. For me, I want to still stay on the kind of side of the draw while we can. So a Club Bruges would be nice. I think out there, it'd be a tricky, but I think we'll get them at home. When a lot of these European teams, smaller European teams, come to Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, the pitch is almost too big for them to be able to execute their tactics and stuff like that. Want to stay completely away from Galatasaray. We go out there and take a hiding. The second leg is already done before you even bring them home. So I want to avoid that at all costs. And then Juve, I'd take Juve, but again, they are sort of seasoned, within this. So I think Club Brugge would be my preference.
Okay, all right. I think I'm changing my mind on Club Brugge being first from after looking back on all the results. I think I now would probably take Juve first, and then I'd take Galatasaray second, and I.
So Jack, was it them that drew 4-4 with Barcelona?
Yeah.
Or did they beat them 5-4?
I think they beat them. I think they beat them like 5-4 or something like that.
Yeah, I was away for work watching that game, and I couldn't believe what I was watching. The way Barcelona play is absolutely mental. I was like, what are they doing? Like, even Ange would be like, that is just too risky the way you play that high line.
Yeah, I mean, for some reason, it seems to work for Hansi Flick. You'd think he's almost a little bit better at that nuts high line than Ange Postecoglou ever was. But yeah, just some of the results they got, even them just absolutely spanking Marseille last night, who needed to win that game to Marseille. I just think, they're a bit more difficult than maybe they come off. But yeah, I think I would probably go Juve first, maybe Club Brugge or Galatasaray tied for second. And then, yeah, maybe I'm starting to think about what David said about Simeone, and also just it won't be pretty football. Let's be honest. It definitely won't be with Simeone. That's for sure. Does anyone want to take this here from Dropkick Your Teacher about Joe Cole and what he said? I'm not too sure what Joe Cole said, by the way.
It was did he say that some of the responsibility has to go on to the players as well? Was that when he was talking on BT, I think, last night?
I think RST sort of maybe picked up Joe Cole's comments wrong. I think because RST was in one of the group chats last night, and he was saying that Joe Cole went after the fans. Now, I listened to a snippet of it today, and it didn't sound like that to me, to be honest with you. It didn't sound like he was saying the fans were the problem.
I think he was saying the players they had to take some of the responsibility. It can't all be on Frank. That's what I think he was saying. I think Ali McCoist agreed with him. From what but certainly I didn't see it live. I was just reading an excerpt, a bit like yourself.
Yeah.
So, I'd have to do a bit more research before I would competently answer that one.
No, I know Joe Cole said the atmosphere was toxic, and he mentioned fans, but he didn't mention fans like saying that we were the problem. He was saying the players are sort of having it out with the fans and stuff, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
So he's more or less going after the squad RST on that one.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then I would agree with Joe Cole. I definitely, I know we talk week in and week out about Thomas Frank because he's the figurehead, but there is responsibility both up and down from his position, into the squad and into the board.
Yeah.
And then we'll take the members' questions here. In case you guys didn't know, if you are a member, we do reserve time for the end of the shows to answer your questions. Do really appreciate your guys' support as members, of course. Dropkick Your Teacher saying it should be noted that teams do play as well in the league phase. Remember, PSG just barely qualified for the playoffs last season. What do you think of fans saying they would genuinely accept relegation and winning the Champions League are getting ahead of themselves? I'll throw that one at you, Colin.
I would never accept relegation. I don't know whether I'm being a bit bloody-minded there.
The Champions League?
No, sure. The Premier League is everything. You might never get back. Honestly, look how many clubs disappear into obscurity. I grew up watching Sam Allardyce and Bolton. Where are Bolton now? You can. I know people are just going to laugh and say we're way too big and whatever. And yeah, that's probably the case. But I wouldn't want to suffer the indignity of falling out of the Premier League for what's momentary glory and doesn't necessarily was the greatest prize of all, but not necessarily going to change your fortunes. We won the second tier prize in Europe last year, and it's done the square root of F all, as I've said already, this show for us. So what would be the point in that? So you'd have, another great parade, but then you have to go and play in the championship next year. No, it's not for me.
He's then saying, do you think we could be 17th next match week? Do you think the board will grow a pair and stop being scared and actually sack him? We're 8 points, I think, ahead of West Ham right now. So that's just factually not the case. I think it would take a few more games for us to be 17th hardest. Do you think?
Maybe he's thinking by the end of February, I think, maybe.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But I do think, there's no reason to sack him now. Because I know we've all had this conversation. Who to get in? Don't necessarily get a new manager bounce, and we are showing incremental, very very small but incremental wins, and it'll be the same squad if you got someone in. So and they're all injured. So yeah, I don't see it being the solution now that they've made the point to sack him was after Nottingham Forest or after West Ham.
Yeah.
And
I think Irish should just have to get grips that this guy's going to be here for the last 16 in the Champions League.
Yeah.
Similar to what Artis had to deal with last season. I know he wanted Ange gone very, very early, so rinse and repeat.
Seen a pattern here, Artis.
Yeah. You're not going to get what you want, unfortunately. What's your favorite Bundesliga club anthem? I mean, I of course went to a lot of Hertha Berlin games, so I'd say any of the chants that I vaguely remember from AOA, Hertha BSC to Do Not Causa was a lot of fun. Do miss going to those games. It's actually my first ever European football experiences, so it does have a place in my heart. Fantasy McShane, in my opinion, early rounds of Champions League performances are not a barometer for optimism, as most teams we played were not even Premier League standard. I'm still in the reality that we are in big trouble in the Premier League. So if we continue to lose in Premier League, how can we stand by Frank until the end of the season? Jack, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with the last point made, that I think the point is kind of gone where it's worth sacking him. I think if we're to lose the next 3 games and sack him, I think any chance of European football is gone. I think we're 6 points behind now. I think if we'd sacked him a month ago, I think we quite possibly could be in a good position to qualify for either the conference or the Europa League. But I think that's gone now. I'm not worried about being dragged into a relegation battle. I just think our quality will just get us through games. So I just think I don't really see the point in sacking him at this point, as someone that is still very much against the idea of having Thomas Frank as our manager. I just don't see what tangible benefit would come from it at this point, to be honest.
Yeah. And then AK Shek saying, what did you guys make of Paulinho's performance yesterday and his season overall? He dropped into the back line as a center back or right back and helped us break the press. He's always breaking up play in the middle of the park. Not sure why he got dropped from the team last month, but we've been chipping goals since. Surely he has to start every game, right? No matter the opponent. Cheers, lads. Dave, I mean, I know you're a big Paulinho defender.
Yeah, look, I think Carragher got his analysis wrong on Paulinho at the start of the season, where he's sort of highlighting, he's not a progressive passer, this, that, and the other. I think, again, maybe it was a lack of understanding on Carragher's behalf around Thomas Frank's tactics and what he asks of the midfielders and stuff like that. But, I think he also missed, and that's where a lot of the criticism around Paulinho came from the fan base, because up until that point, everyone was pretty happy with the guy. But I think one thing he missed is that we brought Paulinho in here to be that shithouse in midfield, to make us more competitive in midfield, so we weren't being run over and stuff like that. If he wants to talk about progressive passing and that, go after other players. But Paulinho was literally brought in here to be that destroyer in midfield, win the ball, moving on. Harry Redknapp famously had Palacios. He said, how he came out famously said about him, all I asked him to do was go and win that ball and pass it to Luka Modric. It's all I needed him to do, because he couldn't do anything else. But with João Paulinho, he's exactly what we need, and he's not the problem at Tottenham Hotspur. Every game he plays, he gives his all. Even when Mickey van der Ven offered out a fan to fight, it was him in there trying to calm down the situation and stuff. He has that leadership, that experience, and you can only imagine what the likes of Archie Gray or Bergvall can learn off him on that side of the game. For me, I think he's invaluable to what we're doing right now, and I think he's the perfect guy to play in Romero.
Yeah, he has phenomenal controlled aggression.
Yeah.
Yes, but he's like, I don't think I could do that. I think I'd just see red mist and I'd end up smashing somebody over or hoarding.
I hate playing against Fulham when he was there, because every time we would break, he'd just pull us down, and the guy wouldn't get a yellow card to like 95 minutes or something like that after committing like 14 fouls. There's an art to what he does, and there's a need for it in a squad.
Yeah, what's funny about that Aston Villa game with Paulinho too is that even though he did look like a man out of hell, really, I felt like almost all of the challenges were clean, even though they were very aggressive challenges. He did come out with the ball pretty cleanly almost, and all of them impressively. So I think he's just touching on this about Joe Cole, saying he said we've also only won one trophy in 30 to 40 years. I don't take Joe Cole seriously, to be honest with you.
He can't wait to get a dig in at Tottenham. Let's be real.
Yeah, he's just wired to hate us.
It's like when people get rattled by Paul Merson. It's like he's asked, what do you expect? He's not going to sit there and glaze Tottenham. He's not Thomas Frank. He doesn't glaze the opposition.
And although there are many Spurs fans that I would, listen to who say that Frank isn't the issue, I feel like, funny enough, there do seem a lot of be a lot of Arsenal, Chelsea, West Ham people that have been coming out saying Frank's not the problem. Frank's not the problem. It's like, oh, how interesting, because it seems like it's benefiting you to say that, with how we've been playing this season.
The reason why they're all saying none of this is Thomas Frank's fault is because they want Thomas Frank to stay in the job because of how far Tottenham's fallen and stuff. When we had Conte and stuff when we were up in fourth, Carragher couldn't wait to blame him and make him the problem and get him out of the job and stuff. People in the media don't want Tottenham to succeed. They all hate us. So when they see us doing well, they want to keep Thomas Frank in a job. If he was at Man United or Liverpool doing what he's doing here, they would be absolutely calling for his head by now.
Yeah. Just that other point that somebody made about us being 17th by the next game day was, you did say accurately, Jack, we're 8 points ahead of West Ham. They're actually 18th.
We're in 18th. That was my mistake.
Yeah. So we're only 3 points away from Nottingham Forest, who are 25 points, and we're at 28. So I think that's the point that they were trying to make, which I wish they hadn't, because that's going to give me nightmares of being in 17th.
I guess I just probably forgot that, and maybe in a way, I
think
just
you were
don't see
trying
much
to
of a
deny it.
difference. I don't see much of a difference between 16th and 17th. I think they're both pretty terrible. If we slip down to 17th, I wouldn't really care. It's about not slipping down to 18th. That's what I would say. We're 3 points off of 17th Forest. They have Palace and Leeds next. Very vulnerable fixtures for them. Leeds are at home this weekend, so that helps them. I mean, that's kind of the point, RC, is that I was thinking more about 18th, which is where you actually face consequences, whereas finishing 16th and 17th, there's no prize for finishing 1 point or one place ahead of 17th. But maybe I'll just throw this one at you, Jack, and then we'll get on out of here. But I did say the only reason I'm really worried about this relegation battle is that the managers that will be coming up against are experienced pros at handling relegation battles. Sean Dyche is like the new Sam Allardyce. He's one of the best there is really at handling relegation scraps. And then Nuno did it very successfully with Forest only so recently, right? So these are guys that are quite good at being in these situations. They know how to lock in. Whereas Ange benefited from all the teams below us. All their managers had never been in a relegation scrap. So they were just always going to get relegated. And Thomas Frank is up against some real competition here.
Yeah, I thought, but in fairness, Frank, you would argue, kind of has that pedigree of keeping Brentford, who would have been kind of underdog side in their time in the Premier League, up. He kept them up quite comfortably his first season, and then I think they finished near the European spaces, and then they finished, I think, 17th then, and then they finished high enough then last season before we got him. So I think he's someone that knows how to kind of battle that out, and I think, as much as I'd have criticism of the style of play, I think it turns every part of the game into a 50-50 battle. And the reality is, if you're putting in 100% effort, you're going to come out on top in some of those 50-50 battles. So I just think we'll naturally pick up results in that way. And I just think our player quality as well, I think especially with Solanke back, I just think we'll pick up enough results. And I think Palace are a team that are in big trouble. I think they're in free fall with losing Gahey is massive for them, and Glasner looks like he doesn't want to be there anymore. They have very little firepower going forward. So I think similar to last season, I think similar to every season, there's enough bad teams for us to stay up, and I think provided we don't drop in quality too much more, I think our individual quality will always keep us just about safe enough, because I think individuals do drag you through games, as we've seen from Van de Ven and Romero. They've not defended perfectly, but they're clearly our two best players, and they've stepped up and made themselves counted in moments with big games. Romero's scored or assisted in the last 4 games. I think that's just the sort of quality you get with those guys. And Solanke, 2 of his 3 games back, he's scored goals, and I think having him back is just big. So
he's going to make a huge difference.
We should be big, but listen, we're closer to the European places than we are to the relegation zone. So I think this mentality from the fan base, I understand people are worried that we're only 8 points above the drop zone, but we're only, I think, 6 points off 7th place. So I'd much rather look and say, why aren't we targeting coming 6th or 7th and getting into either the Conference or the Europa League? I know the Conference League, people might laugh at it, but Chelsea celebrated winning that trophy there last season. Yeah. And Chelsea are a hell of a lot more successful than us in recent years. So that would be my target for the rest of the season.
Same here.
Just try and pick up some results in February, and suddenly you have a completely different outlook. Like, if we can get to Champions League quarterfinal and lose there and finish 7th, I'm going to call that a good season. I still think I'd be in favour of moving Thomas Frank on, but you'd say, listen, he had a rough middle third of the season, but he did steady the ship in the end and got us to a decent position to where we can push on next season with the new manager. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think football fans, by their very nature, are a bit dramatic with things. So I think a couple of good results and we'll all have a very different outlook. And especially how congested the Premier League is. Even if we win the next two, you're probably looking at us being ninth in the league just because of how close teams are to each other. So I think I'm not too worried about the relegation thing. I'm really frustrated that we're looking at another season of just mediocrity really in the league. I just want to get back to, like, you can see Romero and Van de Ven, how frustrated they are that league games don't matter to us. Like, Romero and Van de Ven in the Champions League, they know those games matter. Every game matters. Romero said it last night. We play every game in this Champions League like it's a cup final. And if we were up in third, fourth, fifth in the league, we'd be playing those league games like it was like every game was a cup final. But the lower you drop down, the more mid-table you are, the more it's like, well, what's the point in this at all? So I think if we can get back into a position where the league games start to really matter again, I think we should be targeting to get those European places and hopefully get another trophy under the belt next season in one of either the second or third European competition. So I don't think it's all necessarily doom and gloom. We're just going through a rough period at the moment.
Okay. Maybe it was a masterstroke selling Brennan Johnson at Crystal Palace so that they could fall below us. And then we don't have to worry about this relegation scrap. Appreciate the extra support towards the end of the show, by the way. Artist T, and then also Beto and Logan. Really appreciate you guys in Lily White's India. But I think we're going to wrap it up here, everybody. Be seeing you all tomorrow with all the match preparation for the weekend. And thank you guys for being here with us. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you to these two guys for giving time up in their evenings. Smash the like button, please, on the way out. And we will be seeing you next time. Come on, you Spurs.
So back. Come on, you Spurs.
Back again.
17th, and you know the rest.